Welcome everyone to Mail Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm here to talk about Stranger Things Season 4, Episodes 4 through 7. So yeah, I finished the 7 episodes that are out so far for Season 4, and I got a lot of thoughts on the second batch of episodes. So a lot of positive thoughts, good thoughts by and large. There are some critiques to be had about some of the B plots, I suppose you'd call them. Because I think everyone would agree that the plot in Hawkins is the A plot. That is the main draw of the show. It's the main appeal. It's where the main threat and all the fun Stranger Things stuff is mostly happening. But I was really looking forward to getting to episode 4. I'd heard a lot of big things. Episode 4 did not disappoint. There was a lot of good stuff in there. Obviously, the references and homages to Nightmare on Elm Street just kind of went through the roof. Not that that's the only movie they made a point of referencing in that episode. I'll probably try and keep this. Like, I feel like most of this is going to be talking about the main plot, and then I'll discuss all the other plots kind of separately. Although, of course, the L plot does kind of tie in right at the end. So, like I say, spoilers for 4 through 7. So you've been warned, because I probably will have to casually mention some things about later on. Yeah, I mean, the big thing that I was enjoying about the main plot was the mechanics of this Freddy Krueger type monster who was coming through from the upside down and going after teens in very Nightmare on Elm Street style fashion, where it was like dreams and blah blah blah, and the kids were investigating. We ended episode 3. I think that was where Max was just targeted at the end of episode 3. So episode 4, which is called Dear Billy, she writes all these letters to say goodbye to people in case she does die. It's kind of a somber episode for a lot of her stuff because it feels like it is kind of counting down to like her death, and part of you's thinking, well, maybe she will die, maybe she'll go. And this kind of veers into the group's trying to figure out, is there a way to save her? What could we possibly do? And so one of the big set pieces of the episode from a plot perspective is Nancy and Robin teaming up, which is good fun. They're bonding. They're secretly high-fiving each other or low-fiving each other. But they have to convince the warden or the head doctor, whatever the job title would be, of the mental hospital that Victor's in, right? Because they want to go talk to him because they're convinced at this point that he was a victim in the 50s, and they want to talk to him, and that's Robert Englund's character. So obviously having him in the season with all the Nightmare on Elm Street parallels makes a lot of sense. I didn't know he was going to be in it, but I'd kind of forgotten about it as well, so it was like right before they showed his face where I was like, oh yeah, Robert Englund's in this. Of course, right? Perfect. Obviously that exact sequence was very Silence of the Lambs, right? It felt like they went out of their way to intentionally make that walk to his cell the walk from Silence of the Lambs. Luckily it didn't get as grotesque as Silence of the Lambs, for Nancy and Robin's sake, but they go up and they talk to him, and he talks about what happened about animals being shown up dead once they moved to Hawkins, and then eventually this curse, this demon, whatever it may be, coming after his family. But the big hint, of course, is like he does survive, and part of the reason why he did survive, and the characters figure this out, it's Robin and Nancy who kind of like have the idea, is that music was kind of like a tether, where he heard a song that he really liked and it was like something he knew, and he was able to pull back into reality from there. And this is all kind of like bubbling up, and like the way the two sides of this Hawkins plot in episode 4 converge, where you've got that running as Max is getting more and more in danger, and she's like visiting Billy's grave, and she has this great speech talking about Billy. It was really emotional and good stuff. Sadie Sink's performance, she's one of the standout actors of the younger group, I would say. But she goes into the trance, and she's in the nightmare world, if you will, and Vecna's coming after her. And there's a lot of clues in there. She sees things that obviously are going to be pieces to solve in the next episode or two, and like all that stuff's going on. But this is all happening as Robin and Nancy are running from the guards, because at this point they've figured out they figured out that they've snuck in and that they lied about where they were from and that they're students at this university, and they basically just bolted for the car. So all this is going down. It's one of those things where all of it's really edited very well to create the build of tension, and like, oh, they're just going to like get through to Dustin on the walkie-talkie in time, and he's going to implement this potential lifeline just in time. So you know, they're all getting quite scared, you know, as they're sitting around Max at the cemetery, and then she starts to floating, and then that's like, oh shit, like she's about to die, like this is what it is. But they play the Kate Bush song, and it's a really big moment. Like it's one of the most memorable moments of the season so far, is her running to the portal to the real world that's opened because of the song. But it's notable that it's not just that saves her. Like, it's actually all the bonding and memories of her friends and the people who care about her that actually give her the strength to actually run. Because, you know, like Lucas has tried to talk to her throughout the episode. You know, he's back with the team at this point. Because it turned out he just like led the jocks to a decoy. Like I thought they actually went to the place that Eddie was at, but they didn't. He took them somewhere else, and then ran all the way to the others to warn them what was going on. But he's trying to reach out to Max throughout the episode, and you know, there's this great montage of she's remembering like all these sweet moments from season 2 and 3, and a couple from this season, and you know, it's a big epic, you know, tense, thrilling sequence. Like it's hard not to just be in love with what the show was able to do because of all the rules that it established. And as far as the lifeline with the music goes, I actually love that that mechanic, that rule, whatever you want to call it. I think the reason why it fits so perfectly is it would work in a vacuum. It would work if this was the first time music was ever used in the show. It'd be fine, because it would be like, okay, it makes enough sense on its own. It's something with an emotional connection that you have, that you're perhaps passionate about. Your songs trigger memories, they trigger feelings, you know, all these reasons. But I think why it's so specifically great in the context of Stranger Things is that the soundtrack to Stranger Things has always been a big part of its identity. It's never been something in the plot, but it's always been a big part of what makes Stranger Things feel like it does. And we've had so many things try to copy it by having, like, you know, retro soundtracks that fit the time period. But one of the things about about Stranger Things' soundtrack is that it's not all 80s music. There's actually some of the most memorable tracks that are in some of the episodes are not from the 80s. Like they'll have modern songs at times when it's more appropriate. There's not a ton of them, but there's little things here or there. They make sound kind of retro. I know there's a Dance with the Dead track in episode 3, for example, but they weren't around in the 80s. And there's other examples too. I think there's the Moby song in season 1. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. I mean, unless Moby's been around longer than I thought he was, but I'm pretty sure that he wasn't around in the 80s, or at least making music anyway. Or, I mean, maybe he was, but you know what I mean? Like, he wasn't like a published artist yet, you know. I kind of love it in that perspective. It kind of takes that part of Stranger Things' identity and puts it into the mechanics of one of its plots. So I thought that was really neat. And you know, all the stuff with like her having the vision with her mother that's quite sinister, and then you know, the slow morose build up, and they're worried about her, and that feeds into the next episode where they're kind of like on Max watch, and they're making sure she's got like the headphones there at all times in case like she goes back into a trance. And we don't actually know if Vecna will like come back for her. Like, maybe he's just moved on now, but they don't know that, so it makes sense that they're keeping it going in case, and always having it at the ready just in case they have to go through that. So I really dug that element of the plot. And you know, it goes on to you know, some of the episodes may blur together a little bit. You know, it's even worse this time because it's 4 episodes instead of 3. But like, I love because one of the things rewatching the show before this aired is that season 2's plot line where Will is drawing what turns out to be the tunnels underneath Hawkins that are being made, and like Joyce, someone else pieces them all together. I think it's maybe Mike. And they put them all around the house, and it's like creates this tunnel system. I do enjoy that like what that leads to, and I enjoy Bob being able to figure out, based on like the, you know, where the gaps are, that this is actually under Hawkins, and he can kind of like roughly figure out the locations of the town based, you know, where they are in the tunnels. Like all that stuff was fun, but there is a little bit of a suspension of disbelief with that for me, in that I really don't buy that you could build the image like a jigsaw puzzle out of what Willow was drawing, because most of them were just like straight lines. Like you could literally, the idea that they could put all these together and could tell that one goes with the other and that it would be this accurate final thing was a little far-fetched, because they didn't feel distinct enough to be able to actually tell. You know, they were too scribbly and too sort of erratic to know for sure that they were right. But you just kind of roll with it, whatever. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think it is episode 5 where Max has drawn all the various things she saw sort of floating in rock or around where Vecna's like lair was, like in this nightmare world. This was a lot more believable to me that Nancy like recognized a couple of the elements and was able to sort of assemble it into the house, because each of the things were kind of distinct. You know, the stained glass window is kind of distinct. This is kind of a, you know, a window here. This is kind of a chimney or whatever. And she kind of was able to draw the house around it. This felt a lot more believable as far as being able to piece it together like a jigsaw. So I really dug that. And it leads them to the house, and it leads them sneaking around the house. Stranger Things, what I love this season is doing is that it feels like it's really incorporating a lot of the things that it set up in the prior seasons. And one of the things that it did in season 1, of course, that everyone remembers the fun of it, was the Christmas lights, and the idea that Will was communicating with the lights, and it's used so much here. In episode 5, again, if I'm blurring the episodes together, forgive me, but in episode 5, I think that's where they're going through the creepy house, and there's some fun banter between the characters, and it's all in good fun. And I'll try and point out the ones that I like, but like I say, 4 episodes. There's a great funny moment coming up though from I think it's end of episode 6 that I do want to point out. But they're effectively following where Vecna's walking, because the lights are turning on and their flashlights are turning on. If they're turned off, then they'll turn on when there's a presence in that place in the Upside Down. So they're kind of, but I love that the characters know enough about the Upside Down at this point, and they're kind of like piecing this together from memory, that they get to this logical conclusion, and much like the audience, like as soon as they say their reasoning, we understand and it makes sense. Like that's what I love about like science fiction and supernatural mechanics, when the rules are kind of like clearly defined and we can sort of play with them, because it becomes this shorthand language, and it's used even better after this as well, once we get to the episode 7. But this was all really great fun stuff, and as this is all going on, you've got the jocks running around, and they know they've been betrayed by Lucas, and they end up going, and there's this big town hall meeting where the main jock hijacks it and starts talking about the Hellfire Club as if they're a satanic cult. Obviously, I never used the phrase satanic panic in the last review, I don't think, but this is very much kind of what it's drawing upon, is the idea that people genuinely thought that Dungeons and Dragons was like a gateway to being in a cult in like a satanic way. So them working that into some of this is kind of fun. There's not really been a big payoff to that yet, I would say. You know, that's still kind of lingering. Obviously they do track down Eddie, maybe the end of episode 5, where they're in the lake, and the friend that was targeted to be next gets lifted out of the water and dies the way that everyone else did. I think the thing I loved about this is this public display of this is the Hellfire Club, and there's a photo that he's got, from the poster or whatever it is, the t-shirt, that shows people who are in the club. And I love that for the first time in the show, like, a lot of the parents of our characters are kind of like, oh shit, our kids are in real trouble, because you have Lucas's parents, you have Mike's parents. Of course, Mike's not there to be targeted, admittedly, but they're still concerned. And Nancy's still going to, kind of missing, and so on and so on. And then you have Dustin's mom, and they're all like concerned, and they're concerned that the crowd are getting convinced by this speech that these are all evil kids and they're helping a murderer. And all of a sudden they look at each other going, oh no. And I love Erica, standing up, because Erica, had a great big thing in the first episode, but has largely been absent since. I think there's one time when the jock guy comes to the door looking for Lucas earlier in the same episode, but it's fun stuff. It's like her interactions, and almost like inadvertently becoming like this. Like, she still gives Lucas shit when she sees him later, and demands to know what's going on and stuff like that. But she is kind of like sticking up for the D&D group because she's like, no, that's bullshit. Like, they aren't evil. It's just a game, you know, whatever. I love it. Erica's, you know, a firecracker. She's like, just, you know, let her shine. Basically, is my let her crackle. I guess is that what a firecracker does? It crackles. So all that stuff is good, and I feel like you know, from there, and you go into episode 6 and 7, which is the kids sneaking back out and or getting, you know, the younger kids get caught by the police, and by younger I mean Max, Dustin, and Lucas, while the older teenagers who, because a lot of episode 6 I think is spent finding Eddie. You know, he's out of the rock, which is a good landmark because then we see it in the Upside Down in episode 7. So there's a lot of things to love about where they go with these groups in the last like 2 episodes. The funny moment that I was referring to earlier is when Steve's like going to go into the lake to try and find the gate that's in the lake, the water gate as Dustin wishes it to be called, and he's getting undressed, and Lucas and Dustin, who are at the shore looking through the binoculars, are talking about like, oh, he's dead hairy now. He says the chicks love it though. And Max just sort of says, let me see, like very deadpan, let me see, grabs the binoculars, and there's just like a long like silence of her staring through the binoculars as Lucas is standing there awkward. It was really funny. Lucas had another funny moment actually, before the next time, it's when they're in the house and he's with Erica, there's a moment where he slides across the kitchen counter. I don't even remember what Erica said to him right before, but he slid across the counter and it really made me laugh. But all of this stuff, which is the older teenagers go into the Upside Down via the tear because they basically discover that, and you know, this was actually great. I'm glad I'm thinking about this now because so many of the things that I said in the first review, I said so many things. You know, I asked so many questions. I said all these questions that were kind of being raised by the backstory of Vecna and Victor and this 1959 stuff. You know, I said things like, but the gate wasn't open until 1983, so what exactly is going on there? I love that in the very next episode, Dustin like was vocalizing these questions. He was outrageous saying them. Like, we didn't think there was a tear until 1983, so what the hell's going on? Like, what exactly is Vecna? You know, I think they talk about maybe that if the Demogorgon's like the big attack dog for the Mind Flayer, then maybe Vecna's like his right-hand lieutenant kind of thing, or something. And obviously, there's a lot more theorizing to do with Vecna and how some of this works once we get to all the revelations about who it is in episode 7. But loved all that, like piecing together and just asking all the questions that I was asking. It is sometimes like you're on the ball with like thinking about what your audience is going to be asking, what your audience is going to be speculating, and where their mind's going as they're watching a story unfold. So it's really nice when the creators are on the pulse with that, and like you feel like, oh, they knew exactly what I was going to be thinking. They knew what I was going to be asking. That is a good handle of the audience and the expectations that the audience, or they have of their audience, and you know, it's a self-fulfilling thing almost, to feel that payoff with the characters asking the same questions I'm naturally asking. So that was really nice. But yeah, the older kids end up in the Upside Down. The big episode 6 cliffhanger is Steve gets dragged with a tentacle, because it is teased the prior episode. You see the tentacle in the water, but he goes down, finds the gate down there. There's a small gate in the lake, and I think at this point, like, Dustin's theorizing, oh, this small gate must just be here and it was always here. Obviously, it becomes clear in the final episode of this volume that every time Vecna kills someone, he actually creates a small gate, because they ultimately get out with the new gate that's been created where Chrissy died in the trailer. So we end episode 6 with them in the Upside Down. Or Steve's in the Upside Down. He's been attacked. It's looking quite, you know, rough. I love that there's no water on the other side. Like on the Upside Down, when he goes through the gate, there's no water on the other side, which I guess makes some sense, just because of how barren the Upside Down is. And episode 7 starts with the others like showing up to help him, right, and beat off the weird bat-like creatures, and like, So we have this group of main characters who are now, like, the Upside Down was this thing that we saw glimpses of in season 1. We saw little glimpses of Will being there, and they went in at the end to get him, and you know, it was a fairly restrained amount that we saw of it. And we're at the point now where an entire group of main characters are going to be in there and like having to like problem solve. And this is what I love, is everything they learned and know about the Upside Down, they then use to communicate later, right? They go to Nancy's house, and because everyone's at Nancy's house in the real world, all the kids are being held there by the police with their parents to interview them, and the kids are trying to figure things out, talk what their plans are, and in the Upside Down, Nancy and co hear Dustin's voice, and they realize that they can manipulate the lights and turn the lights on. And I think it's Erica who notices the lights they're changing and getting really bright, and they end up using the kid's toy, right, the little girl's toy, which is just like a light board, to like draw letters. And I love this because it just, everything about it it's the feeling that I love maybe the most about Stranger Things, is when these mechanics are kind of like used to pay off things, and and the characters use the information that they've already learned to, and it's something that has been there since season 1. You know, from the Christmas lights, which was a very simple kind of method to it, and figuring out when the Demogorgon was coming and stuff like that, and it's kind of progressed since then, and I really, really dug that. And then, you know, obviously they make this trek, and I love that all the older teens have to get on the bikes, because it's like, oh, now they're in the Upside Down, but they're all riding the bikes that the younger kids were at the start of the show. It's just it's a neat visual to have all them having to be on the bikes. And obviously it all builds up to the ending where they're coming back through the gate and Nancy goes into the trance, and you know, and I love hearing Vecna say Nancy, because Nancy is the name of the main character in A Nightmare on Elm Street. I was actually a little disappointed that Robert Englund never said her name. Like, I was disappointed she never said her name was Nancy so he could say it back to her. It would have been fan service, don't get me wrong, but I'm glad that we got to hear Vecna say it, because it's, you know, it's very, you know, it's very Elm Street. So I like, all of this stuff was super fun to me. Obviously I've glossed over some of the details here, and I do need to talk about one of them. So when they come up with the plan in the Upside Down, when they're at the Skull Rock thing, and they're like, we need weapons if we're going to fight through the bats to get back through the gate, Nancy says, hey, we don't have to go to the police station to find weapons. There's guns at my house, right? You know, because of the events of the prior few seasons, she's actually got a couple of guns in her house. So they go to her house, and immediately that did sort of raise some interesting points for me, like you know, my thinking, because I was like, well, she expects everything she has to be there, and at first I thought, well, is that a bit silly to expect like all the items you have to also be at the house in the Upside Down? But then I thought about it and went, well, but the house is there, and we've seen that before, right from season 1. Like, we see it, the buildings, you know, I think we see like the maybe the library or something, you know, with Joyce and Hopper, and like the houses are definitely there. So if the buildings are there in the Upside Down, then presumably items would be too. And when they do get to her house and they go into her bedroom, like, sure enough, like, obviously there's an extra caveat I'll get to in a minute, but, you know, her diary is there, her clothes that she used to have are there, so things do appear here that mirror the Upside, because I you know, my mind was racing with theories here, and, you know, in a minute when she realizes that it is her house, it is her bedroom, it is all her stuff, but it's all her stuff from when the show started, or more specifically when 11 opened up the tear, as if like time has frozen in the Upside Down ever since 11 made the gateway. And that's intriguing, because part of me was also thinking, is it more just a time travel thing where when they go into the Upside Down they go back to this point? Is time not allowed to move forward in the Upside Down because there's been a disturbance, and like almost like justifies why the Mind Flayers kind of pissed at 11 and everyone for their shenanigans? Or, you know, like, what is the cause of this exactly? But that is a very interesting element to look into, and the idea that time is moving here. One of the things that I thought, you know, before it kind of solidified some of these details, is I was thinking, what if the Upside Down was only created at a certain point, and everything's just the same way it was at the moment it was created. You know, it's not continuously copying things from the real world. It just did it once when it was created. You know, I even thought, did 11 technically create the Upside Down in some way? I don't think so per se. Although, given some of the things we see in episode 7 when we get to the backstory and the villain reveal and all that, when we see the villain go into the Upside Down for the first time, and it's just like clouds. It's just like clouds at top and bottom, and there's lightning and all that. You don't really see the color scheme matches the Upside Down, but it doesn't look like the Upside Down. It's a copy of the real world. It did make me wonder if the idea of the Upside Down being a copy of some kind of the real world might not have always been true. That maybe it was just more of like an empty dimension of like shit, and then for some reason it was formed into a replica of some kind of the real world, a twisted replica, and that may be tied to the villain, and them being there from when they went there, which I'm getting to all that stuff in a minute, because obviously that's big, huge stuff. So some really intriguing mythology. I think that's one of the things that all this main plot stuff, and the 11 plot ties into this as well, obviously, is it was playing with the rules and using them in more overt ways, which I love. There's something really nice about a detail that is like a one-time special thing in an earlier season or an earlier movie, but then in a sequel or a later season, you get to just like have characters know it, and it becomes more of a solidified thing that can be used reliably. And I'm talking about the communicating with the lights from the Upside Down, and the characters having a chance of surviving and getting out from the Upside Down because of everything they know. Like, one might look at this and go, well, isn't this a bit shit? Because, like the whole first season, Will couldn't get out of the Upside Down. And I'm like, well, yeah, but there's multiple things that make that okay. One, Will was much younger than these characters. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know there was a gate that he could go through. Because keep in mind, he never went through a gate per se. The Demogorgon like coming for him is what kind of ended up with him inside the Upside Down. And he also didn't have any knowledge about it getting in there, right? He didn't know what it was. So these characters are older. They have context. They know some of the rules. They have help from characters in the real world who are also trying to like figure things out. And I do love the fun physics of the bed sheet rope through the portal, through the gate in the trailer, where the gravity does flip when they come through. And I was getting worried as they were coming through one by one. I was like, oh god, something's going to happen to one of them. Now, because it's this trance that Nancy goes in, which then has all the good big like juicy like exposition mixed with the 11 stuff, I suspect that they're not going to get trapped in the Upside Down, and this is the main thing that's happening on the way through. Like, she's not seen any things before now, so this shouldn't be her like instant death scenario. Although it does seem like Vecna's shown her a lot, so maybe he wants to show her stuff. Maybe he's like doing something different now. He's playing with the characters he's interacting with. Because there's a great thing when there's a great moment when they're riding through the Upside Down and they look over and they see the house, right? And there's like lightning around it, and it's clear that there's activity. They know that's where Vecna hangs out. They knew that from visiting the house in the real world and seeing all the lights. So all that stuff is super fun, and like the characters are delightful throughout. Nancy gawking at Steve's chest when he's taking his shirt off, Robin noticing it and having a sly little smile on her face, Eddie trying to compliment Steve for being metal and him not really getting it. Just all these little things, all these little character touches. It's great that Max, gets to cheer up a little bit, and that's not a complaint from her being the way she was before. It made sense going with her character for those first 4 episodes, and she's really obviously she's facing her death in episode 4. It is nice to see her have a little bit of life again, where she's like sitting with the little sister, Nancy's little sister, who was like a baby in season 1 and is now like a 4 or 5 year old, whatever she is, and is being upbeat and is not like dreading things anymore, and is checking out Steve's chest because they're all getting a bit older now. Because that's the thing, Steve's getting frustrated that he's always paired with the kids and he's always paired with Dustin, and But Nancy does remind them at one point that you know, they're not babies anymore. You keep saying you're babysitting, but like they're basically the age we were in season 1 now. Obviously that's not how she phrases it, but that's, you know, effectively they are. I think she says they were sophomores in season 1, and they're all finishing up their freshman year, I think. So they're very, very close to the same age that these characters were in season 1. So that's kind of cool to come like full circle like that. So yeah, I love all that stuff. Obviously, I'll talk about 11 and lead us to, like, you know, when these plots cross over, because I do think that the way it happens, because it's not surprising, I don't think, the revelations. I think by the time you get there, it's seeded so much stuff in both plots that it's not a surprising revelation. I do think the way it does it is quite cool. I love that the narration of the 11 plot starts to go over what Nancy's saying, and you know, if you hadn't got it by that point, like the two backstories merge together, and it's kind of beautiful. It's a great, like, oh shit moment, even if you do kind of see it coming. And you know, I did, and I think one of the things that I would say about 11's plot, and we'll get into a lot of the other details of it, but the idea that she's got into this tank, this sensory deprivation chamber, the Project Nina, which is the name of episode 5, and she is effectively been along with like old security recordings, being shown stuff that happened at Hawkins' lab, and she's reliving memories. And it answered obviously my question, because I said, did she remember this incident, this massacre? And she didn't, right? You know, she doesn't know it happened, and it's building up to her seeing this, and the whole idea is that she just has to remember how to really tap into her powers. So going through all of this trauma, and again, trauma, it's a bit of a theme this season, right? Given that Vecna's going after characters with trauma. And Nancy's, of course, is Barb, which was a nice, you know, I was like, okay, all of this feels like it's part, you really, like, I'm sure things change over time, I'm sure, like, plans, you know, alter as you're going through writing a TV show, and I do think the idea that Steve and Nancy are being, like, kind of, like, set up again to possibly actually be a romance, and, like, Jonathan maybe getting ditched, that feels like maybe a course correction. It's a bit of a response, because everyone ended up loving Steve, and no one's ever really been that into Jonathan. And I think, you know, stuff like that will alter, and you'll adapt, and you'll, you know, write your story and have it work for what you're doing with the characters, and you'll go with what works. And so maybe some new great ideas that you never had when you started the show, and you had like a map for the whole thing. But I think stuff like the backstory of the villain, and the idea that we have something like some of the traumas that these characters have went through are things from prior seasons. It feels like, oh, this is where having a roadmap of your entire show when you started it is actually a really great, like, asset. It makes so much of it feel like it clicks together. And not every detail will, because some things will change, and maybe you decide to ditch something that wasn't, you know, didn't work as well as you thought it would, and so on. But that's a nice detail. But yeah, so she's got into this, and I will say, so what I was getting at is that the number one, the creepy orderly who's nice to her, the second they showed his face, I was like, don't try and pretend to me, show that this guy's not a villain. He looks like, I was getting like creepy, almost pedophile vibes from the way he was looking at 11. It was creeping me out. He was a villain. Like, I just knew immediately he's a bad guy. There's no two ways about this. And the second he started talking about how number one used to be here, but he's not here anymore, I was like, well, I'm pretty sure you're number one. I've got a good feeling you're number one. You know, and sure enough, that turned out to be the case when he eventually made his turn in the final episode. But tying him to Vecna, and that he is Vecna, is very well set up. And I do think you can predict it. And what actually did it for me is, funnily enough, I think it was episode 5, it was when the guy in the lake died, right? And, you know, it's around this time, either just before this or just after this, that we get the big speech about the satanic club to all the parents in the town and all that stuff. It occurred to me that the way these characters are dying, right? If you take away the Nightmare on Elm Street, like, sort of trance and like the stuff happening in their head that we're seeing as the audience, this could be 11 doing this. That was one of the thoughts I had around that part of the season. I was thinking, if 11 was here and people saw her use her powers, they would think she was the killer. because the way that the characters get picked up and then all their like bones and legs are all like broken and their eyes gouged out, 11 could do that. That is like her powers. I mean, not specifically to kill people, but like the manipulation of an object with her mind is her power. And as soon as I had that thought, I'm like, well, Vecna has to be related. It has to be someone with the same powers. And even the idea of the Freddy Krueger style like dream sequences, it's not something that 11 can do per se, but you can definitely see the sort of the link to it, in the sense that if you think about her when she's going to look for people and she goes into sort of the all black world and she's reaching out to people, you can sort of see like a tether from that to what Vecna does, right? The idea that he can reach out to people and he can go one step further and like do this manipulation to their head. The idea that maybe 11 could be capable of that if she tried to do it. She wouldn't necessarily want to. Maybe she'll do it to a villain later on or something. But you can sort of see how that is like an extension of what 11 can already do. So because I had those thoughts, very immediately I was like, well, I've got a funny feeling someone in this backstory with 11 is going to end up being Vecna. Or if not in the backstory we're seeing from her, it's going to be tied to that eventually. And once I had that idea in my head, it was just like, it just made too much sense, and it worked, and it tied the plots together in a way that was going to be satisfying, because ultimately I think 11's plot, I like a lot of it, and I like some of the revelations that come out of it, and I love what it's sort of building to with her, is like being a superhero. She even like, there's a moment in the episode 7 where she, like, and this is the funny thing, this is when she's a child. Obviously they're doing this fancy thing where we're mostly seeing 11 at her current age, but every so often it'll transition to the young kid version that they've got with some digital trickery to show that, you know, she was really, you know, smaller and young when it happened, but we're doing this thing where she's reliving it, so we're mostly getting like the present day 11, which is good from like just a easier to shoot. We get, you know, proper performance from the actor, so on and so on. But she gets like a superhero moment, and this has been a big thing about a monster or a superhero, right, ever since like episode 3. And she gets this thing where she sort of lands like in the superhero pose, you know, when like Superman lands from flying, or Black Widow lands from a big jump or something, like you get this kind of pose, and she has that kind of moment. I thought that was worth pointing out. So I got excited because it was like, this just clicks together and it makes too much sense that these things go together, and it's why 11 is the natural enemy of like this villain, is that this is like her, you know, in a way. I mean, the Mind Flayer is her arch nemesis, I suppose, but this is more like the arch nemesis who has the same power set. You know, like Flash has Reverse Flash, Superman. Obviously, you think Lex Luthor first, but the equivalent to this would be Zod, or, you know, so on and so on, right? You can think of tons of, you know, Shazam, Black Adam, you know, there's more examples. Marvel has tons of them as well, but I do think it maybe spins its wheels a little bit. You know, we see a lot of these early flashbacks, and obviously I did love seeing the parallels to her being bullied, where she's bullied in the Hawkins lab. And because like the first episode implied that she did this, right? And I just kind of took it for granted that she did. Obviously, once all this started unfolding, it started to become clear that if the villain's here, if Vecna is really one of these kids, then it's probably actually Vecna who does this. And it ended up not being one of the kids per se. It was, you know, it was the guy. And as soon as I, you know, met him and he started talking to her, I was like, yeah, well, this is probably the bad guy. But once it got to that point, where she's getting bullied and we're seeing these kids be mean to her, the parallels from this and then her being bullied in the real world is, you know, it's quite sad. It's like, oh man, she's always had to go through this shit. They're mad because she's getting better at things. She's actually becoming more powerful. And I think it's number 2 who's like the head honcho bully, and he's like, he was the best at the powers beforehand, and they're really pissed at her. But you can tell that number 1's manipulating her into like being more hateful of them, and ultimately he wants her help to remove. He's got like an inhibitor thing in his neck, which ultimately she takes out, and that's when he does the massacre. He kills everyone, and it's pretty deranged. I think like, as much as I said it kind of gave away that he was the villain because he was instantly kind of creepy villain man. He just looked like that. They did cast him well in that once he starts doing the killing, he does feel like a creepy villain. Like, you know, it works. Like, it looks good. So this big revelation stuff towards the end, where young 11, like, finds him having finished this massacre, and he then goes on to explain things, and it intercuts with Nancy seeing the flashbacks, and we realize that it's actually Victor's son who is Vecna, who is number one, and he was responsible for everything. It wasn't some curse from the Upside Down. And so the big the mythology thing from this that is really interesting and fascinating is that number one was not given powers or created in a lab. He naturally somehow had powers, and all of the experiments that Brenner has ever done with the kids came from him. Like, they tried to replicate stuff from him. That, you know, they probably took his DNA, they probably did all sorts of crazy shenanigans, and they tried to duplicate and replicate what he could do with other kids that they felt they could control. Because ultimately they didn't think they could control him. Well, they did. They decided to control him, but they controlled him by taking away his powers, by, you know, putting this thing in his neck. So that is a fascinating revelation to me, because instantly your mythology of the show alters a little bit, because now you're thinking, wait, so someone naturally got powers. Does that mean that someone else can naturally have powers? Unless, of course, do his powers in some way actually still tied to the Upside Down? Because obviously what happens here is that he's going to kill little 11, but a little 11, like, you know, recounts the memories that make her angry and sad, uses that to power up, and she maybe is the most powerful we've ever seen her, because she uses both hands. So she puts out both hands and not just the one, and she's fighting number one and is able to, like, hold them off. And I like the idea that the powers from number one didn't have anything to do with the Upside Down, and it's just the idea that these two titans with these powers clashing like they did created a tear and created the first ever gate to the Upside Down. The idea that, because this would have been a little bit before, obviously, season one. It's 1979. Right? We knew that from the first episode. And the idea this is the first time there was ever a tear. Because there was no tear in 59. This is the great thing about this, is because we find out that he just naturally had powers, and this was him doing it from within the house, there is no, like, explanation needed for how there was a tear to the Upside Down, because there was nothing from the Upside Down happening. The first time, as far as we can tell now, that the Upside Down has ever been accessed from the real world is 1979, when 11 and number one, like, their powers collide and creates this tear. And he ends up, you know, going in, and he's getting struck by the lightning, and he becomes the monstrosity that we see in the, you know, and then as Vecna and the present day Upside Down. You know, I will say, yeah, the CG of him being struck by lightning was a little, you know, CG, right? Obviously, what they're doing, like, there's no really other way to do it, because it's so, like, absurdly, like, apocalyptic and over the top. So conceptually, I really liked it, but it definitely is this big thing. That was the other thing I was really noticing, and it was really the end of episode 4 onwards where I really felt like, man, the scope of this show has, like, gotten so much bigger in the and not just because there's, like, characters going off to Russia and stuff, but just in the sense that we're seeing all these big set pieces that are clearly very expensive. And, you know, they talked about the budget of each episode being $30 million, and you can kind of tell, like, especially in the back half of the season, there's a lot of stuff in the Upside Down that you can tell is where a lot of that extra money is going versus prior seasons. So, you know, but, you know, this big, I mean, don't get me wrong, he's a bit monologue-y, right? He's a bit villain monologue. It's a bit like he's trying to, like, recruit 11 as his protege to be evil. There's a lot of things you can compare that to, but ultimately it is a kind of a relief that 11 didn't do this bad thing, right? She didn't, like, snap and kill a lot of people. She was actually horrified by it and decided to fight the villain. And because she was questioning if she's a monster or a superhero earlier in the season, to find out, obviously, that all of this is very traumatic for her, reliving these memories and seeing these things, but because of that, like, this has to be, it's vindicating for the audience and definitely for her, because we're happy for her that she is getting definitive answers that she isn't some monster. And arguably, even, and I said this back in the first review, like, even if she did do this, it's not really her fault, because she was so young, and you know, she was given all these powers, and, like, and then we see how badly she's being bullied, so there'll be lots of, like, reasons to think and understand why someone that young who's like, I don't know, 7 or whatever she is at this point, goes through this. But to find out, no, we have a villain, we have this monster who is her new nemesis, and she did try and defend herself and fight back against him for everyone that he just killed, despite the fact that a lot of them are really shitty to her, is quite nice. It's quite a nice character, superhero moment, and I am very excited for her now getting back and being able to interact with the others, and for them to share information, and her to learn about the whole Vecna thing, and that's what this guy is now, So really great stuff. Obviously, what I've completely glossed over in all of this is Brenner, and the fact that he's waiting in this secret lab when they get there, and she tries to run. It's kind of traumatic. You kind of want Owens to stand up to Brenner a lot more. He's clearly not happy with what they're doing to her, but kind of believes it's what they have to do. But he's starting to doubt Brenner as time goes on. Brenner's a really interesting character in this season, in that obviously we're getting all these things where clearly Eleven's regressing into kind of seeing him as this father figure, and it's a little hurtful, especially given how much she was idolizing in a much more healthy way Hopper at the start of the season and calling him dad. So obviously I look forward to that reunion at some point, but this manipulative thing that Brenner is to her, and seeing him sort of do that again, even if the intentions and the end goal is needed, this is the quick way to get her back to where she is. This is this necessary evil. I'll be curious to see how they wrap up some of this stuff with him, but yeah, if I have a critique about the L plot, is that it's very reminiscent of season 2 in some ways, and I do appreciate that they tied back in a lot of the bits from season 2. Her mother coming to try and get her as a young kid, reference to number 8, and just all the other various bits and pieces that we knew from then. The reason why I'd say it's reminiscent of season 2 is because Eleven's very separate from the rest of the plot. She's done her own personal thing, because even without the trip to the city in season 2, even before that, it was just Hopper, right? She was on her own, just talking to Hopper, and she was separated from all the other characters, and that's a little frustrating at times, because I saw a great comment online about how one of the biggest appeals, I think, of Eleven's character is her interactions with the other kids and just the world in general. Because she was so separate from the world, her fascination of discovering things in season 1, and then again in season 3 when she's discovering new stuff with Max, the mall, shopping, and just how to be around kids her own age. Her interactions and the way she sees the world and her innocence, sort of contrasting it, is one of the biggest appeals of her character. More so probably than the mythology of what happened in the lab and all the crazy conspiracy backstory sort of stuff that she has. So inherently, I'm going to like her being in the group season 3 more than being separated like this. But I do really like ultimately where it's going with all of this. It's very, big and dramatic and all the rest of it. It's not like this cerebral, nuanced thing. It is definitely veering a bit more towards a simplistic superhero versus bad guy kind of origin story, but that's okay. I think that fits in the context of Stranger Things. I will say that maybe, episode 5 through the end of the show, or the end of the volume, it did feel like maybe there was a little too much of her reliving these memories. I don't know if all of them were completely necessary, perhaps, but ultimately it's not a big deal. I've got more critiques with other subplots than I do this one, for sure. And I think it is building to a great thing. And in the same way that, in season 2 she went off and she got a little bit stronger by learning to harness her anger a little bit. This is kind of a bigger sequel to that, in the sense that she's really learning to get her powers back, obviously, first of all, but also potentially level up and be the absolute biggest and best superhero she can be. And I'm kind of excited to see the payoff to that. So no, but I really liked all the stuff in episode 7 by and large. It's almost cheesy, maybe a little bit of the monologuing was. I was hard not to be wrapped up in it and just be into it. And I'm excited to see the fight with Vecna, and this idea that he has like a personal vendetta against her for putting him here. And it does make me wonder, like, why now? Why is Vecna suddenly killing people now? If he's been there since 1979. One of the thoughts I had was that maybe the Mind Flayer, having been defeated, in season 3. Now, obviously, they never fought the Mind Flayer directly. They fought this like monstrosity that was like the Mind Flayer, that looked like the Mind Flayer, that was created out of like dead people, a giant monster. But it's not the actual Mind Flayer in terms of the big smoke version of him that's in the Upside Down. And being defeated in season 3, I wonder if the Mind Flayer either realized or like then turned to Vecna and it was like, oh, you're like her, I can fight fire with fire, I want you to like, start doing your thing, right? Was Vecna like a prisoner of the Mind Flayer before then, before he became like this soldier for him? Or is there another reason why Vecna is now doing this when he was not doing anything before now? Has the Mind Flayer given him extra power? Like this idea of being able to reach through the Upside Down and do this, is that because he's had a boost from the Mind Flayer in some way? Because the Mind Flayer, of course, has like power. I mean, maybe that's why he can do the whole dream, like, trance thing. Because the Mind Flayer's whole thing is that it could take people over. It would get inside them. We saw that with Will in season 2. We saw it with all the body snatcher stuff in season 3. Maybe the Mind Flayer's given some of its power to Vecna to enhance what he can do to do all this. And maybe the idea is to create a lot of tears. Maybe like, part of the cliffhanger of the season is going to be like things coming through a lot of these tears, and we're going to get this apocalyptic final season. I don't know. But I was thinking about that. I was thinking about why now? Why is Vecna doing this now? And not in the prior, 8 years? So I think that's interesting. It's interesting to look into that. And I'm sure, and it did such a good job of like voicing, if not answering, the questions I was having back after I watched episode 3 when I did the first video, that I'm confident it's going to at least poke on this, if not outright like give me some answers for it. And that's exciting. So it feels like it knows what I want from it in a lot of ways, and it's cool. So I mean, I guess like I'm over 50 minutes on just like the main plot and 11's plot, because like that is where the juicy stuff is. That is where all of the meat of the show is. It's where all the exciting stuff is, and I loved all that stuff. The Hawkins like gang especially, like that's just like a constant like 10 out of 10 basically. The 11 stuff is slightly less so, because I would love her to be interacting with other characters, but I understand the reason for the separation, and I do think the payoffs of it and her big sort of hero moments, and we see like why she ends up with the blood coming from the eyes. It's because she's fighting Vecna. It's because she's like not holding back against him. And it makes me wonder if even Brenner, like, I mean, I assume he saw the video footage, so he probably knows it wasn't her. I mean, I know he walks in and says, "What have you done?" But presumably he saw the footage afterwards and went, "Oh no, it wasn't her. It was him." Oh, I suppose you could argue that it's still her fault because she, let number 1 unleashed. She's the one who did that. So I suppose in some way, the "what have you done" still applies in that context. So maybe Brenner does just know in the moment that it was number 1, but ultimately it was, whatever. Anyway, so the other stuff to talk about, which is Russia, the Joyce stuff, and of course the California crew, which is a bit more up and down in quality, I would say. I think the first thing I would say is that I don't think, I said last time that episode 3 was a little guilty of like always pairing like Joyce scenes with Hopper scenes, and I get why it wanted to do that, but it kind of felt like it bloated it a little bit, and we didn't need to see as much of both of them. That general feeling's kind of continued, and not so much that I would necessarily cut much of what happens plot-wise, but I would definitely condense it. I think the episodes don't feel too long to me. I actually think they flow quite well because I'm so into most of what's going on. But I would say that the last episode does need both because they're going to converge. But I would say that before that, what I would have done I'd condensed each one down a little bit, and I would only have one or the other each episode. So you'd have an episode where you'd get a subplot with Joyce and Bauman on their way to Russia, and you'd get an episode after that that's just some of the Russia subplot. Although I do think there is actually a potential strength in not showing any of the Russia stuff until they get there. Like, if you imagine that if we hadn't seen Hopper all season, and then the first time we see him is when Joyce and Bauman are up looking down at the fight that's about to happen, and Hopper's just in the lineup. Like, that could have been effective. Now, admittedly, we would lose a couple of good scenes if we did that, because I don't necessarily love everything in the Hopper plot. I do think some of the escape attempt and the breaking the foot, I think we saw in episode 3, if I remember right, but like the escape attempt and then being recaptured immediately and all that, like, I don't know if I necessarily was in love with like the progression of that, but there's a couple of key sequences that I did quite like. I liked Hopper getting into his backstory, and it kind of reveals more about him, and that he feels guilty about what happened to his daughter because he thinks it's like him. He thinks because of what he was doing when he was in Vietnam, I presume, where he was helping mixing chemicals, that a lot of the people he worked with had like troubles with potential children, and he had a kid because his wife wanted one, and it seemed like it was okay, but then she got sick, and he certainly thinks it's like him, it's his fault, his genetics that resulted in her illness, and he feels like a monster, he feels like he's a curse. And I like that because there's a nice parallel to 11, which is what makes them perfect as this father-daughter like duo, is that they both like have this thing that they feel that they have to make up for, and they both see themselves as kind of monsters in some way, but what they don't realize is that they both actually help each other like feel warmth and love, and like they're kind of a perfect pairing because of that. And I do kind of love the idea that, you know, him thinking, oh, if we can fight this Demogorgon, then, you know, maybe I can do one last good thing for 11 before I go, right? So he's kind of like accepting his fate at a certain point. And they have the Last Supper scene, and like he knows its weakness is fire, so he makes a point of securing some booze and whatever to make a little torch when the time comes. But I did like the speech about his backstory. I did quite like, obviously it's a very dark and sad backstory, but it kind of like him thinking that everyone, like, don't get me wrong, I do think too many TV characters, because this is like a really common thing, like TV characters saying, no, I have to stay away from everyone I love because I'm a danger to them all, like, you know, bad things follow me around and I'm a danger to them all. But I think I liked it in the context of this because he talks specifically about what happened to his daughter, and because it thematically tied into 11 thinking she was a monster, I kind of really like the parallels there between them. And then also I like the speech of like him doing one last good thing for 11 before he dies, and looking for the miracle. And honestly, the guard that was helping him that then gets arrested because he gets ratted out by Yuri, I want to say, is that the guy's name? But he's all right. Like, their chemistry's okay. But definitely, I think it could have been condensed down a little bit, and maybe only in every other episode, as opposed to, because, you know, the California crew do skip an episode or two. They're not in episode. I don't think they're in episode 7 at all, are they? I don't know. There's a couple of episodes where I think they just skip, and I feel like both the Russian plot and the Joyce and Bauman plot would have benefited from just being condensed down and put in one episode. Well, not all of it, but you know what I mean, like for every 2 episodes, you know, put it down to 1 episode, if that makes sense. So that's, you know, that's kind of how I feel about that. Like, I don't, some of the actual action of the escape and stuff is a little just kind of, it feels like a little redundant, I suppose, at a certain point, because ultimately there was never going to be an escape, and it felt that way at the time, even when you were watching it, because it's like only episode 4, and episode 4 is great, but you know, he's doing this big action scene where he gets a jet ski, and there is a moment, there's 2 moments in these plots, there's one in the Hopper plot and one in the Joyce plot, where I kind of like got taken out of the show a little bit because of how ridiculous it was and how un-Stranger Things it kind of felt. And one is him in the jet ski, just because it felt like it was out of a different show or like a movie or something. Where like, why this is like Die Hard 2 now? That's if you went back to season 1 Stranger Things and you told me there was going to be a scene in a couple of seasons where Hopper's escaping from a Russian prison in a jet ski, I'd have been like, what? It wouldn't feel like it fits. Whereas everything in the other plots, well, it's getting bigger and the upside down stuff is getting more prominent and bigger and more epic, it still feels like it's like an evolution from where we started. Whereas this stuff feels a little bit weirder as far as fitting into the story goes. And then the moment with Joyce that felt like that was the plane, specifically the crash landing. I'm like, wait, Joyce and Murray are like crash landing a plane in Russia? Like, this is insane. And I don't know if it's insane in a good way. Like, it kind of took me out of it. Like I said, I just kind of like, oh, okay. This feels a little on Stranger Things, I suppose, is ultimately what I would say about it. It feels a little too out of something else. But that's not to say that I didn't like any of this plot either, because it did make sense to me that they would, like, the Russians would want the others that infiltrated their base. So Yuri is quite a amusing character, I would say. I was getting chuckles from him. I liked Bauman, like him, like shaving his beard to look like Yuri. I was like, oh man, you actually do look kind of like him now that you've done that. And obviously it was set up before that he could speak Russian, so all that made sense. So that stuff was fun. And I never mentioned in the first review that he casually said in episode 1 that he has karate in Friday afternoons, because that was like a funny little beat on its own. I didn't expect a payoff to it, but I will say that all of his karate stuff did amuse me. Like, it's obviously silly, but it's the sort of silly that I can enjoy. Him like doing the various poses before he fights Yuri, or later when he actually takes out a few Russians, it's like, oh wait, he actually is doing okay. But there's the jokes of like, you've never actually been in a real fight, and the only person you beat is this teenager once. I laughed a lot when I think Joyce asks, like, what is the age range of this karate class? And he's like, it doesn't go lower than 13. It's like 13. It's like, yeah, 13 to 17. And I'm just getting this picture in my head of Murray Bauman like in a karate class with a bunch of like pre-teens and like early teens. It's really funny to me. But so there is stuff to enjoy there, and at least Joyce and Murray get to be with each other, right? So they get to play off each other. And I think one of the things that maybe unequivocally for me will probably put season 3 still above this when it's all said and done, even though I'm loving so much of what this is doing, is that more of the plots got to be fun in season 3. And I get that we're doing a darker season, but ultimately, one of the things that was the funniest in season 3 was Hopper. Like, Hopper with Joyce and Murray in season 3, and like their stuff with Alexei, and like him running around in that Hawaiian shirt, being Magnum PI, like that stuff is amazingly like fun, and he's so likable. And seeing Hopper just be miserable in the Russian prison, and like his hope being drained from him, it just means we don't get the Hopper that we love. We get this Hopper instead, and it makes sense. Like, it makes sense in the context of where he is and what he's doing, but it does rob us of having that vibe that we got from him in season 3 that I was just in love with. Because one of the things that I loved in season 3 as well is that season 2, I like Hopper, I like Eleven, I like a lot of the heart they put into their story, but they got mad at each other a lot, and Hopper was spending a lot of time being overly protective. It was great in season 3 that they just kind of separated the adults from the kids and let them have their own plot, and it let them just be fun. And I think like that's one of the reasons why I think season 3 like is the top. It's not the only reason, but I think it's one of the reasons. Is that the adult plot actually ends up being really entertaining. There's things to like in both the Russian prison plot and the Joyce going to Russia plot. But yeah, ultimately they end up, turning the tide on Yuri, and they pretend that he's Murray, and Murray pretends that he's Yuri. And by the way, if I'm getting this name wrong, it's not Yuri. I think it is, but if I'm getting it wrong, you know him. Like, I've referred to him as Yuri every time so far, so you at least know who I'm talking about. But they go to the prison, and I love that Joyce, when they do like gain some control and they're at the prison controls, she just starts hitting every button, meaning that she's probably let out tons of prisoners while she's trying to let Hopper out of the death arena where they're fighting the Demogorgon, which, by the way, I love. There's one of the deaths of the prisoners where the Demogorgon like just throws him up, into like the I love anything where a monster throws a person at like the corner of like a roof or the corner of like a wall and just hits off it. Maybe that makes me a little bit sick, but there's something about the ragdoll like just impact to that I just find sickly amusing. So I was into that element of it. And it was good stuff. I love that Hopper knows what he's about to fight and he's got some intel. Again, much like the kid using the lights in the Upside Down, him using his knowledge of like how to fight the Demogorgon, really cool stuff. And probably my favorite moment of either plot, now that they've come together, which is nice because it means it's not two separate plots anymore, which should help the pacing a little bit in the next 2 episodes. But is that little smile that he gives, like, you know, he hugs Joyce and it's a really sweet moment, but it's the moment where as he leans into her like, you know, he's her head basically, you know, he's sort of like snuggling into her head, where you see half of his mouth smile, and it's just like a really genuine thing that you're so happy they're reunited. And don't get me wrong, like part of this being a kind of a miserable plot is like wanting him to get back to characters that care about him and how uplifting that potentially will feel when it happens. Like, obviously I get that, it makes sense. But you know, there's a balance to be struck, and Stranger Things, like at its best, is always got a bit of a sense of fun, even when the stakes are high, even when there's like lots of like fear and horror and drama and whatever else. Like, I don't know how they get out of the prison, or you know, how they fly back. I wonder if there's going to be some like upside down shenanigans. Is 11 going to pop through a new tear and like bring them in that way and then pop back out in Hawkins? Because it does seem like the California crew are on their way to Hawkins eventually. They're on their way to where 11 is, so that's their whole goal. Which, oh yeah, like, so that's the thing, I've not even spoken about this group yet, so I've not spoken about the like surprisingly great shootout sequence in episode 4. So episode 4 has the infiltration of the mental hospital, it has the big ending with Max and the countdown to that and that big emotional conclusion, but it also has the random shootout at Will, Jonathan and Joyce's place, which is so the two like so the lady that works with Owens like shows up at the end of episode 3 to them, and I was like, oh, maybe they're going to tell, and they do tell them that, you know, Eleven's going to go and do whatever, but they can't tell them the location for best safety and interest that you don't know about it, and you just have to sit tight. But there is like a basically a sort of civil war in the government right now between people who are on Owen's side and like this villainous general who's going around and thinks she's responsible for like all the murders in Hawkins. So that's going on as well. Obviously, one of the guards here that gets left, when I thought he died in episode 4, but you know, then he's getting tortured for the next 2 episodes, and it seems like he's probably giving them the location of the secret lab where Eleven is. So we've got the villainous general and his guys going there, along with potentially the California crew. But yeah, so they get attacked, so they're going to escape anyway. And I think what I liked about the subversion of this is that they're calling Argyle's Jonathan's friend, who I still hate, by the way, but they're calling him to deliver pizza because that's what his job is. But the idea being that they can sort of sneak out and go with him, and their plan is to go to Utah to find Susie, which I loved that they wanted to go get to Susie. The idea that she would be able to do something. Wait, actually, was that the plan? No, that's not the plan yet. The plan is just to go to Hawkins right now. They don't come up with the go to Susie plan until after they get the phone number in the next episode. Sorry, this is the problem with doing all 4 at once, is that they blur together a little bit. But yeah, the subversion of this, which I really like, is that you think the scene is going to be them sneaking out the window to go to the pizza van, and that feels like a believable thing that's going to happen because it's a very Stranger Things scene. We've seen lots of characters sneak around with some synth music playing, and that would be the sequence, right? Because there's so much stuff in the first couple of seasons of the kids sneaking around their parents that it just feels like a natural thing they're going to do. It's just going to be a slightly like more grown-up version of that. We're going to have the older teens now all sneaking out of the house to get away from their 2 bodyguards because they won't let them leave. But just as this is happening, and they go to get the guy goes to get the door for the pizza, it's a soldier or an agent or something, and he shoots him, and we get this very great shot sequence. It's a, you know, there's a big oneer in the middle of it where the camera's kind of dancing around the various characters taking cover behind different walls, and there's different like potential enemies coming in from different rooms. And I have to say, this agent, the bodyguard who's like protecting them, like obviously he eventually gets shot and he dies in the van in the next episode, but he goes out like a hero. The way he like, so he basically is, it's not quite a John Wick because he's not doing like hand-to-hand combat, but the way he's like protecting them and like taking on all these like oncoming enemies on his own. He's outnumbered, he's outgunned, but he's doing his best and he holds them up. And like, this is the sort of scene that's so well shot that it made me like this guy just because the action scene was so good. I was like, yeah, come on, agent man, you're good at this. You're a goddamn hero. But really well done. Like it suddenly made this group of characters have a scene that was so exciting, because relatively speaking, I was a little bit worried now that they weren't with 11. Like, okay, what's this group going to do? Obviously, it's building them to help in 11 because they know that there's bad guys potentially on the way to get to her, and they go to Susie to decipher this phone number that the agent gave them as he was dying. I mean, there was a bit more to it than that, but let's skim over some of that. And they go to Susie. The scenes around Susie's house, I mostly had fun with. I didn't love everything about it. It was definitely very wacky and a different type of 80s style of movie, like all these like crazy kids in this family running around doing stuff. I wasn't sure how to feel about the little kid who thinks he's a movie director at first, but I did laugh the second time we saw him, because they're basically distracting Susie's dad because the computer's now in his room because Susie, you know, altered Dustin's test results earlier in the season. And there's a moment where he thinks his daughter's actually hurt because she's lying. It looks like she's had her throat slit, and she's just acting. And then the little kid director is over his shoulder shooting with his little crappy camera, and then yells "cut," and he says, "That was great, father." That was I can't remember what the line was, but it was something like, "Oh, there was fire in that performance." So it wasn't that line, but it was something like that. And the way he sort of like clenched his fist and he was so proud of his scene. I'm not gonna lie, I thought it was great. I thought it was funny. I'm all for a little kid movie director getting a cameo again at some point. But I do love that they show up and they're like, "Hey Susie," and Susie's out on the roof tinkering with her antenna, and she's like, "Who the hell are you and why are you in my room?" And they're like, "We're Dustin's friends." So I thought that was amusing and whatever. And there's some references here, you know, there's some War Games references with the setup of this stuff, and the idea that, because, you know, it occurred to me like, oh wait, they're actually dialing a number and then like using the computer. Like this is like the internet. This is like an early primitive, you know, like thing in the internet. I don't even know what else to call it. And so I obviously it's a little bit of a cheap joke almost, but I think it makes sense in 1986 that, like, because the internet, because if I don't know the exact timeline, but the earliest version of the internet did exist, I think, in the 70s. And, you know, obviously it's not what it is today, and it's not what it, you know, by the time everyone was getting the internet, it obviously became much more advanced and very different. But the primitive idea of computers connecting and, like, there being, you know, it's, you know, as you see it here, it's just mostly text and nothing else. But, you know, that was around. So the idea that in 86, you know, this nerdier kid who knows all this sort of stuff and hacks and things, like, would know about it and, like, gets snooty when the other character's like, "What's the internet?" And she's like, "It's only going to change the world." And yeah, she's right. It does alter things quite a bit. No internet, no Stranger Things for a start. I mean, it's a pretty good point to make. So, but no, I had fun enough with this. Like, you can shoot Argyle into the sun. And, you know, Jonathan could probably go. That's the other thing. They're teasing Nancy and Steve. And honestly, at this point, I think everyone would prefer that. No one wants Jonathan at this point. And he's kind of useless. Like, his thing in season 1 is that he was like the sensitive guy who really cared about his brother, and he was he was going to look for his brother no matter what. So that ended up, you know, the motivation to find him and the motivation to find Barb brought him and Nancy together. But as time has went on, he's been less and less useful. and this season he's just completely useless. So I think it's smart that this group's not in every episode. I think it really is smart that they're not, because I don't think they have enough to do that. And I do like that they're ultimately going to be there to help Eleven, and I imagine they're all going to go to Hawkins together once they maybe get her in episode 8 or by the end of episode 8. But yeah, I like, it's definitely, they definitely feel like the least important as far as like stuff going on, even though some of the characters in this plot are, Mike was arguably the main kid out of the group in season 1, and 11 obviously maybe arguably is the main kid, but you know what I mean. But Dustin definitely was kind of the fan favorite and kind of became the one that could figure things out, and there's actually a lot of that in these batch of episodes. I even talk about this idea that Steve's giving Dustin shit for having a bit of an ego because he's always just making these assumptions, and like, he is right about a lot of the things that he comes up with, but he's the one who thinks about all the upside down ideas. He names things, so he has like this big purpose, and he's also just a really fun character to be around, so he naturally has ended up being the most important of the 4 friends, if you will. Wells felt kinda like not as important basically the whole time, just because I said this last time, but he was the MacGuffin, he was the plot like thing in season 1. That's what they were trying to get to, and obviously they're teasing that he's gay, and they'll do something with that. It is kind of funny that Mike is so separate from everything this season. I think inherently because obviously Mike was going to go see 11, that put him with that group, but because 11 went off to do her own plot, it left anyone who was with her feeling, to begin with, feeling like they're kind of like a little bit separate from everything and definitely less important. And it is a little bit weird that Mike is in that group, because you do think of him as being like one of the main kids. It's just maybe just a knock-on effect. Not that I'm saying that I think the main plot in Hawkins would be like is missing him necessarily. If anything, the group that's in Hawkins feels like all the fan favorites got thrown together. I mean, I wouldn't say maybe all of them definitely are, but I think Dustin, Steve, Robin, and Max are probably 4 of the favorite characters on average. And then I think they're doing great stuff with Nancy this season, and Lucas has his moments. Eric is great. Like, it does kind of feel like all the fan favorites kind of got lumped together into the best plot, bizarrely. And I ain't complaining. I certainly ain't complaining. So, but I'm looking forward to obviously things coalescing, and I always do in Stranger Things. It's one of the fun things about this show is that even in season 3, when things weren't as split up, the plots were still separate. When the adults run into the kids and the 2 groups of kids, because you remember that Steve and Dustin's group were down in the mall lab, and they were doing that on their own, and then it wasn't until the very end of the penultimate episode that they teamed up with the other kids again. So I'm excited to see things come together in the last 2 episodes, and I've really enjoyed the build of the villain. I think it's great how distinct Vecna feels from the other villains. Obviously, it being this more personal villain, it being more of a traditional superhero or RPG style, like arch nemesis that has the same power set, maybe more powerful than the main character is. The idea that the Mind Flayer, whether it was always this way or the Mind Flayer realized that he has a person with the same power set as 11, and maybe that's how he fights her, is quite interesting. Because they know that season 5 is the last season, and they announced that there's going to be a season 5, and they've kind of marketed this as the beginning of the end. That's literally on some of the posters. I do wonder if this is the one season that ends with a proper cliffhanger. Like, the other seasons obviously have little teases at the end for the following seasons and stuff, but by and large, the season story's wrapped up in a pretty neat bow, and then has a little tease for what's coming next. I do wonder if this one, because it is known as the penultimate season, might get more of a proper cliffhanger. But well, I mean, we'll see. We'll see. I do think Vecna's plot will be wrapped up, though. I think Vecna will be defeated, and we're probably going to be dealing with the actual Mind Flayer in season 5, is my guess. Like, there's outright not an avatar made out of human bodies. Maybe there'll be a lot more in the Upside Down in season 5. I don't know, but I it's going to be something kind of like that. And I do wonder like how they played all the characters in season 5, because while it likes to split the characters into groups, I do think in season 5, anytime they're separated in the final season, we're going to be annoyed that they're not together. Because this is the last chance. It's the last season where we want them all to be with each other. So yeah, I'm excited though. This month's going to take a while to pass, because I'm looking forward to these last 2 episodes. I do wish the show was weekly. It'd have been fun talking about these week to week, one at a time. It would have meant that the wait for the last 2 wouldn't have been that bad, because they'd just be the next couple of weeks. But hey, I do like that they're going to get their own focus. I like that no one can spoil the ending right now, and like I get to review those 2 pretty quickly, because I just need to watch those 2. I mean, they're long episodes. I mean, the final episode's like 2.5 hours long. The episode 7 of this batch was 1 hour 40, which is, that's a movie. It was just an outright movie at this point. And it flowed relatively well, and it felt like there was a lot to get to, and I was loving so much of what it was doing. I can't emphasize just how much I love the main Hawkins plot and everything they're doing with that, and playing with the upside down and uncovering this mythology, and the idea of like there've been missing pieces that 11 can fill in later and vice versa is just exciting for when they meet again, on top of just like them all being excited that they've got their superhero back. It's hard not to really root for the characters and want them to succeed. So yes, and like I said, the parents of the kids in Hawkins actually know they're all in danger. If not from a serial killer, they think they're in danger from other parents and other kids who are maybe hunting them as like potential murder suspects or whatever. And then they all escape, and the parents run out going, "No, come back!" So I'm curious to see what the ramifications are for that, because so much of the show has been the kids hiding this stuff from their parents. Joyce being the exception, because she was more directly related to what was going on. So I'll be fascinated to see, getting into season 5, if like this is something where the parents just have to like witness some of the supernatural stuff before the end of this season to understand, like to some extent, unless there's like some way they kind of get out of it where they're okay with what's happened and understand that their kids are not villains, or the town understands they're not villains, and then we go from there. It does kind of feel like the only way they can advance without their kids being seen as criminals or cultists or whatever is if the town in some level witnesses some of the Stranger Things, to just use the title of the show. But curious. But man, I've been talking for a while on my own. My voice is, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling the voice right now. So I'm probably going to wrap this up here, but I am super excited for the conclusion to the Vecna story and everything else. So good stuff. It's good stuff. I've really enjoyed my time with the season, but certainly some of the subplots could maybe be trimmed down a bit. And not even so much because they're hurting the pacing overall of the show. I think the episodes still go in quick enough because it's cutting back to like the better stuff as often as it can, but more just for the pacing of their own story. They'd probably feel better if they were a little bit more condensed. But I think this is maybe just a byproduct of them feeling that they need to give all of these characters a plot to be in, and for them to feel equal on some level. Maybe not to the main plot, but certainly to like all the plots that aren't the main plot are supposed to feel somewhat equal. And it's okay to admit that they aren't, and you can just sort of make some of them smaller and not see as much of a character. There is a real debate to be had. Like, is not seeing Hopper until Joyce does make us like miss him more and be happy that we've seen him, versus seeing him be miserable and trying to escape and all this stuff throughout the season. I'm actually a little bit bummed that they revealed he was alive, and because they showed like a clip of season 4 ages ago that revealed that he was in Russia. Imagine if they didn't do that and Joyce got that letter, the ransom note looking letter saying Hopper's alive, but we hadn't seen him yet, and we don't see him until she does. So it's kind of like a leap of faith where you're hoping that like he is, but you don't really know. Like her, you're kind of like, you don't know for sure. Like that could be quite effective, I think. So it's kind of, it's maybe a shame that they did just sort of decide to like show it all, fake mustache and all, as quickly as they did. But hey, but there you go. That is my thoughts on episodes 4 through 7 of Stranger Things season 4. I look forward to coming back for the final 2 episodes in just over a month. But let me know what you thought of the first 7 episodes. And I'm sure I've not talked about some stuff. I'm sure I glossed over some things. I'm sure there's little funny moments that I didn't mention, because it's hard to remember every little thing in 4 episodes. Honestly, I might rewatch them before the last 2 episodes hit. Purely because I liked them that much. Not because I feel like I need to, but because I enjoyed watching the show that much that I might, casually, I'll spread them out more this time, because I watched these all over like 2 days basically. But I might like just casually watch them again on the build up to the finales coming out. So let me know what you thought of the season so far in the comments. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, all that stuff. Get me on the Twitters, me at Wibble89, but MailFuzzTV at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. You can support by liking, subscribing, dinging the bell. You can support financially by hitting the super thanks button on YouTube, or of course go to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and support us on a regular basis for as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses for your troubles. So do any and all of those things. It's always appreciated. But thank you very much for joining me. It's been a pleasure. I am going to rest my voice because I've got other stuff that I need to talk later on today. I've got streams to do later and other shit. But thank you very much for joining me. I will see you soon. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?